Hey, what's up everyone? Dragon back again, here to tell you that you should be watching Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. So Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster is a 1964 Kaiju classic, which kind of doing this video now because A, this is a film I wanted to talk about, and B, with the recent release of the first trailer for Godzilla King of the Monsters, which is slated for May 2019, I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about the movie that essentially this other one is kind of sort of a reboot of, in terms of it's the first time Godzilla, King Ghidorah, Mothra, and Rodan ever appeared on screen together, and kind of was a very iconic pairing because at the time these were, four of the most popular kaiju of all time, and arguably perhaps even still the four most popular ones. But this film, while being a classic Godzilla film from the Showa era, for being the first time these monsters mostly appeared together on screen. Prior to that, Godzilla and Mothra did appear in a film together, which they kind of battled it out. This was a film that, in a lot of weird ways, whether intentionally or unintentionally, was a bit of a metaphor for the state of the world, and really even the state of the world to this day, and kind of using, again, kaiju as an allegory for a lot of social political issues. And what I mean by this is that a lot of what separates us in terms of nationalities, ethnicity, belief systems, all these kind of divides that we kind of put up to separate us from one another, it are really kind of a lack of not just communication, but a lack of wanting to communicate. It is so much easier for us to just paint someone else as the other, and deem them as foreign or alien to us, and therefore impossible for us to kind of find any sort of common ground. And to the outside looking in, you would see a lot of people. I always said if like an alien race just came down and looked at humanity, they really wouldn't see difference in colors, language, ideology, or anything. They would just see a bunch of human beings and be completely confused as to why we all think we're so different from one another. And in the case of kaiju, these big giant monsters, humanity kind of looks at them and just kind of sees, well, they're all the same. They're big, they're mean, they're destructive, they ruin our day. So what's the difference? And then you come to find out that amongst the kaiju themselves, they're warring factions. They don't like each other. Hence why you see Godzilla and Rodan just, going at it. Even though from the outside, they just like two big giant monsters. Who cares? One flies, one doesn't. That's very much really difference. But to them, they don't see themselves as similar. They see themselves as odds with one another. So when Mothra comes about to enlist their help against King Ghidorah, you would think, okay, whatever, they're all going to fight. No, these two monsters don't care. They don't want to work together, even though working together would solve a lot of problems. Realizing that you have so much more in common than you don't have in common would allow you to kind of just see things for what they are and get a sense of the big picture here. And yet, Rodan and Godzilla in this film are so consumed by their own sense of self-righteousness, by their own sense of, I guess, self-worth, for lack of a better term, that they don't realize that they have more to gain by working together, that they can, have a more, productive existence, if you will, by kind of banding together. And essentially Mothra just eventually gets frustrated, goes off and, takes on King Ghidorah herself, before eventually the other two just kind of realize that, there's bigger things at stake and they need to begrudgingly work together, and they do so, and eventually they defeat King Ghidorah. Spoilers, by the way. So when I say this movie is a metaphor, is that when you look at a lot of big superpowers in the world, especially today, while we're not at war, and hopefully we don't go to war, there's a lot of tension, and it seems like it's a lot of tension between countries that are both kind of economically and militarily kind of roughly equal to one another, more or less. And you would think that, okay, well, these guys have a lot in common. They're big, they're powerful, they're industrious. Imagine if they all got together and worked together, how much more productive they would be. And instead, there's this friction, there's this tension, and it's like, why? And it's because it almost has this alpha mentality of like, there can only be one alpha. There can only be one big bad, dog on the block. And it's very much this case with like Rodan and Mothra. These guys are very big, powerful, brutish kaiju by nature, whereas Mothra is more benevolent, relying more on her intelligence and her skill than just brute force. Because in terms of brute force, Godzilla and Rodan are considerably stronger than her. So she doesn't have that mentality. She's much more analytical, much more logical. So these two are kind of, even though imagine if they worked together. I mean, they're already pretty much unstoppable. Now imagine if they teamed up, they really would be. And yeah, they don't see it that way. They don't want to work together. They want to just be at odds with each other. And from the outside, you realize how stupid that is. And how really it's lack of communication. And in this film, it's the first time where really we kind of understand and kind of hear what the kaiju are thinking, feeling, and saying. And this is all done through the Mothra's twin fairies, who are essentially playing the roles of translator for Mothra and the other kaiju. They are kind of communicating to the human characters what the kaiju are saying to each other. And it's the first time we really kind of get a sense of really what they say when that they are talking to one another, and what they're saying. And you realize that Godzilla and Rodan are so kind of self-absorbed with their own sense of superiority that they don't realize what's going on around. They don't understand that they are part of a larger picture. And that really extends to a lot of big powers in the world, where you have so much power that you start to lose sense of your place in the world, and you kind of think the world bows to you. And I know in certain Godzilla continuity that's exactly what the world does, but in this continuity, Godzilla is still a fabric of the world itself. And that now there is a bigger, more powerful force coming, King Ghidorah, that, okay, if it's a case of might makes right, then your claim to supremacy is about to be usurped, because there's a bigger, mightier kaiju here that essentially feels the same way you two do. And if that's the case, if that's really the world you want to live in under those rules, you got to realize that when someone comes along who's bigger and badder than you, well, that's it. By your rules, they have more of a right to be here than you do. So it's an example of that. Just because you have a lot of power, just because you are mightier than those around you, doesn't necessarily mean it is the most advantageous way of going about conducting yourself. Because if you literally create a situation where, like I said, might makes right, where the strongest are in charge or in control, then you are creating an environment in which if someone who comes along who is bigger and stronger than you, well, then they have more of a right to be here than you, and it's free game on you. Whereas if you work together, if you lean on each other and have, work cooperatively with others, well, if something else does come along that's bigger and stronger, it may be bigger and stronger than you, but it's not going to be bigger and stronger than the collective. It's not going to be bigger and stronger than you and all your friends. And that's basically how they defeat King Ghidorah. They all team up, and granted, King Ghidorah still gives them a good fight. It's not a pushover fight, but it's a fight you realize that each one of them on their own probably could not have won without the aid of the others. Rodan, is strong, but Ghidorah's bigger and stronger in the air. Godzilla is a kind of a brute grappler fighter on the ground. Ghidorah is still bigger and more powerful, and Mothra is essentially just kind of support really in this fight. But you put all three of those components together, and they equate to a kind of just a force that's just bigger enough and strong enough to kind of overpower King Ghidorah. Again, not by much, but it just goes to show you that on their own, individually, they probably would not have been enough. And it took them working together. And they were able to work together so well because they had way more in common than they didn't, essentially. And it took kind of, getting a spoonful of their own medicine, essentially, them eating crow, so to speak, for them to kind of realize that, there's always going to be someone who's bigger, badder, and meaner than you. So if you're just relying just on you, eventually someone's going to come along and kick your ass. So you need to rely on others. You need to realize that it is more advantageous to be part of a group, of a collective. I mean, everyone loves this notion of the lone wolf. It's very romanticized and sounds very cool. And as long as you're able to kind of, handle whatever's coming your way, that's great. You'll look fantastic, and, the mythology just kind of builds and builds. But the second there's another lone wolf that comes along who's bigger than you, stronger than you, you're going to get your ass kicked, and then that's it. But if you kind of build your legend within a group setting, well, you'll never be alone, and you'll never feel the need to kind of just do it yourself because, A, no one expects you to, and it just makes sense. It's not about pride, it's about survival, and that's kind of what the kaiju in this film, especially Rodan and Godzilla, they have learned that strong as they are, they need to work together, because while the humans are no threat to them, they even say too, when Mothra says, the humans need your help, they say, why do we care about the humans? We don't care. And they don't need to care, because they're bigger and stronger than us, and we can't defeat them. So as long as that's the case, yeah, they can just lone wolf it all they want. But what happens then when someone on their level comes along? They have to realize now there are threats that are more than just planes and tanks. There are threats that now can actually challenge them. And that's why they need to kind of form bonds. They need to form kind of friendships, or rather at least that's the word I'm looking for, allies. And even if they're not going to be buddy and chummy, they need to realize that they all have to share this world, and that there are forces from, in this case, beyond the stars that, might have ideas for this world and might want to take this world for them, and that if they at the very least want to continue to have their freedom, they need to at least be able to work together when those threats, descend, so to speak. So it's a film, really, I kind of, what I took away from it, and something that I kind of really took away more as years went on, as I got older, and I was kind of able to kind of intellectualize what I was saying a little bit more, is it's basically a story of, how kind of the, how do I want to phrase this, kind of the falsities of being so self-assured in our own power, our own dominion, because it is only as such because you have yet to encounter opposition that can defeat you. But eventually, just as you came about and basically asserted yourself over everything else, eventually something will come about that is more powerful than you. And when that happens, if you're on your own, that's it. You're done, because just like you were able to kind of defeat all that which stood against you, this thing is essentially the new you, the new Godzilla, basically. So Godzilla is now the planes and the tanks to King Ghidorah, and King Ghidorah is the new Godzilla. And just like planes and tanks were useless against Godzilla, Godzilla is essentially not quite as useless, but ultimately will be ineffective in ultimately defeating King Ghidorah. So Godzilla is no longer, the reigning champ. But if Rodan, if Mothra team up and basically say, okay, this isn't just one of our world, it's our world. We all kind of, do what we do. We all kind of have our little sections of the world where we kind of do our thing. But as a whole, we share this world together. We need to protect this world together if we want to make sure this world is still around and can include us. Because if King Ghidorah is there, he's not going to tolerate, the presence of other kaiju, because he doesn't want to be challenged. So it's basically kind of a metaphor, I feel, for really like a lot of the major superpowers in the world, and even just superpowers throughout history. When you look at empires, more often than not, empires that really should have worked together always were kind of at odds with each other. Not always, but usually they're at odds with each other, because everyone, it's this alpha mentality where it's like, I am on top, I am in charge, the world should be mine, and the other one's like, no, I feel the same way, and the guys over here feels like, I feel the same way. So instead of working together and creating something even larger and more prosperous, they are constantly, there's butting heads, there's friction. So again, you look at the world today, it's one of the largest, most powerful countries, and they're all not really super chummy. Again, right now we're not at war or anything, and like I said, I really hope that stays that way. But there's not a lot of warm, fuzzy feelings between a lot of these big, countries and superpowers, and that's really just kind of on a lot of the political leaders that are kind of running all these countries. But again, it goes to show that imagine if all these countries worked together. What they could accomplish, what they could achieve, and if they worked together for kind of the betterment of really everyone, how much more we could advance in such a short amount of time. But instead, we're always just kind of like, circling each other, baring our teeth, just kind of giving each other the stink eye. And it just, from the outside looking in, it's ridiculous. So when you see the human characters in this film watching the kaiju just kind of at odds with each other and arguing with each other, they realize that, man, if these guys teamed up, this would be way better. We might actually have a shot against King Ghidorah. But they're just too busy bickering amongst themselves. And it's funny, because in that moment you realize that they are us. They represent us. They represent us as a whole, as a humanity. Inability to just work together when we have so much more in common than we do apart. Like when you watch Rodan destroy a city and you watch Godzilla destroy a city, they may do it in kind of different ways, but to the people on the ground, like, well, our city's screwed. Our city's gone. I don't really care that Rodan did it by flying over it and creating a sonic wave that blew it, or Godzilla just annihilated it with his atomic breath. The point is, our city's gone. So as far as we're concerned, they're all the same. You know, the end result is all the same, and we just kind of see it for what they are. That destruction is destruction. They all cause destruction. They're basically the same. Whereas those two see each other as like, no, I'm completely different than him, and no, I'm completely different than that guy. Even though from the outside it's all the same. So when you see maybe perhaps smaller countries looking at some of these larger ones who are just kind of at odds, it's like, why? What's the point? What is anyone getting out of this? And if we work together, there is more to gain. You have great power, and you could do a lot of good in the world if you just started thinking about the world and not your own selfish motivations, not worrying about positioning yourself above the world, you know, with the sun behind you looking grand and glorious, because nobody else sees you that way. You are the only one who sees that. These other big powers don't see that way. They just see you as competition because, hey, I want to be in the spotlight. And the smaller countries are just like, this is stupid, people. I mean, aren't we past this yet? And that's really what this movie, I feel, was kind of a bit of an allegory for. Now, I mean, and it's not very heavy-handed. I'm not saying they beat you over the head with this message, but I think it's a nice underlining tone with this film. It is about humility. It is about taking great power and realizing that there's always going to be something greater out there. There's always going to be a power larger than yourself out there. It's essentially like, okay, if you're the biggest guy on the block and you're the bully of your neighborhood, you're the biggest, you're the baddest. Okay, fine. Everyone runs away from you, trembles at your passing. But what happens when the new kid moves in town? He's bigger than you, he's stronger than you, he or she, and now they can kick your ass. Okay, well, your whole basis for your existence here was that you're the biggest and the baddest. So when you're no longer the biggest or the baddest, your whole identity is shot, essentially. And in this case, it's very much like, okay, that's what these guys are vying for, to be the biggest and the baddest. And then someone who's bigger and badder shows up, and it's like, what now? How do we define ourselves now? And how do we, defeat him, this character now? And again, so it's going to be kind of curious to see, you see touches of that metaphor in the trailer we saw for Godzilla King of the Monsters. But we'll talk more about that movie as more comes out. But yeah, so before that movie comes along, if you're kind of curious about the mythology of these characters, the kaiju you're going to see in that film, and kind of see where it all started, and kind of, the initial spark of putting them together and the friction of putting them together, Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster is where it all began. And you really kind of see as a great metaphor of kaiju kind of representing, in a lot of ways, the failings of humanity. They represent sometimes the worst of it. They're indicative of our mistakes, and that's kind of why we reap what we sow through them. And in this case, they are kind of representation of our inability to just get along. And it sounds maybe like an oversimplification, but that's kind of the beauty of this film, I think. It is a very simple message, and that is, we have more to gain by working together. And it's that simple, and yet, despite that simplicity, it is probably one of the hardest things for human beings to do, is to just get along and work together. But in any regard, message aside, it's a fun movie. It's a classic kaiju movie. It is the introduction to Godzilla's greatest nemesis, King Ghidorah. So there's a lot of great just fanfare in that film. So with that said, Ghidorah, the Three-Headed Monster. Have you seen it? If so, what did you think? How does it stack up for you guys in terms of the Godzilla pantheon of films? If you have not seen it, I will put links in the description section below where you can pick it up. Give it a watch, come back, let me know what you think. Again, if you guys are curious about these other characters besides Godzilla now that the trailer's out and is kind of, captivating everyone. It seems like the trailer's being very well received by everyone, which rightfully so. I think it's a fantastic trailer. And you guys want to just know more about the Godzilla mythology, or just learn more about these other kaiju that might be kind of new for you guys who are maybe just familiar with Godzilla, because everyone knows Godzilla, but you might not be as familiar or familiar at all with like kind of the other kaiju within his universe. Hey, here's a great one to start with, where it has the ones you're going to see in 2019, and one of the films that really kind of started to define their personalities as characters. So this is a good one to start with. So come give it a watch, come back, give me some of your thoughts, let me know what you think. I'm always very curious to hear, especially when it comes to kaiju films, because obviously it's kind of my wheelhouse, as it were. But anyway, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace!